we need to have a continued talk about safety and our beloved freaking sport. It's such a love-hate relationship because there's so much good that comes out of this sport, but yet it's swallowed up by some moments that just hit you just square in the chest. And unfortunately, Aidan Zingg is the topic of the conversation. This rising star that should have had so much life to live. He was taken from us, the community, and my condolences go out to his family. And there's so much talk about how this could have been prevented and what went wrong and who to blame. And I just feel that we need to start more of a conversation on what we can do better, because this shouldn't have happened. And yes, freak things happen, and it was a freak accident. Okay, he was ran over, and the paramedics that were there were doing CPR. They were doing everything they could to help him. There's so many times in this sport where I have seen talented young men fall victim to what could possibly be better. And it has sparked a conversation. At least ones like this that involve teenagers, children, because you don't like seeing it happen. And you always end with a coulda, woulda, shoulda, which is sometimes the worst. It's regret. And I don't want to see this sport just fall victim so many times to that. I will say that there's been massive improvements. However, it could still be better. I know, talking with the sport on a professional level, now the flaggers are all wearing helmets and they're traveling to the races. So it's not up to the tracks to hire the flaggers, is to my understanding, which is a good step. But I don't want to see this sport no longer fall victim to when the normalcy of a four-way stop, putting in a light after a fatality. And the amateur racing is a big proponent to this because they are the fuel to this sport. The professional racing is cool. However, the youth is what is going to continue this sport to survive. They're the ones that are in the trenches. They're the ones that are paying the bills for all the pro riders and the teams by their purchase of their products. And so as a community, we owe it to ourselves to make the sport safer. And yes, there's been improvements, but it has sparked a lot of conversation on the internet, and I really genuinely like to see it. Part of it was David Pingree. These men with influence get going and start about what we need to do. And there's so many other people that get involved that are talking about this sensitive topic. And Aidan Zingg, he should still be with us today. And I am so sorry for his parents that they want their kids to sign up and live their lives and have a fulfilled life. And that's why the youth is so important, is because they're the ones that are still dreaming. Sometimes us adults become jaded and a little bit washed. And so our dreams start living through the eyes of these beautiful human beings that just see life differently. It's something that we hold on to because we value how they look at life. And I just want to touch on some of the things that were said by some of the people. And Pingree, I'm sorry for just pausing you looking like that. I believe you can take a good picture. But Chad Reed had a good answer. Is he said lots of comments and hard for me to buy into it. The biggest problem I see is that everyone stays on an 85 Super Mini far too long. Yeah, kids usually are on 85 Super Minis until 16 or so. More 12 to 13 year olds need to be on 125s, not Super Minis. The wheelbase is small. it's easy for it to if you ever tried to whip a little bike, they are sketchy because the wheelbase, they're just not stable. And as you become older and faster, and that whole compound interest of your riding ability, you can start to ride over the bike's ability. And I see a lot of kids, I agree with Chad, a lot of kids on 85s can override the ability of that. It's like the Carson Brown effect. You see Carson Brown just running the dog piss out of a super mini, and it can be dangerous. It becomes a pit bike at that level. And he goes on to say, is with the 250F age groups, as a dad pushing my kids the bike to the line against grown men is outrageous and totally unacceptable. Kids should have a safe place to race against their own age groups in the transition to the big bike. No parent would ever let their 14-year-old run head on against a 20-plus year man in football. WTF are we doing in moto? And honestly, I would say that that's probably the biggest thing that we can do for amateur motocross is have more age groups. And I'm not one that values having more classes because it just becomes a long day. You know, maybe not so many 50 classes, not 5 age group 50 classes, but there is a place for them. And same thing for their schoolboy, which is the 16 to honestly 24. That's still a pretty big, or is that college boy? So schoolboy, I think is 12 to 15. I like that one. College boys, I think the 18 to 24, which is kind of borderline, but I agree with Chad. There needs to be a difference. I remember when I was on an 85 and it was, hey, do I go for a 125 or do I go for a 250F? And really it was, I need to go for the 250F because it's faster. But there's no transition level for the 125, and hence why none of the manufacturers are making 125s anymore. And I commend David Pingree for helping getting this conversation started. And Brian Deegan jumps in here and he says that let's help bring safety to all motorsports by having comms. And I 1000% believe that, because what happened to him or his son at Redbud over a tabletop that's 80 feet long and the lip is 12 feet tall, so the riders are jumping 20 feet plus in the air, and Deegan crashes out front. And what Brian goes on to say that is we have to sit back and watch it all play out. And unfortunately for his son, he was able to walk away and still finish the race. But that could have been life-altering as well, because that was a similar situation with this young man, Aidan. And if we did have comms on there, the argument saying that it's unsafe, the amount of safety that it would bring versus it being unsafe, yes, of course, if somebody's screaming into your ear when you're going through a whoop section is not okay. You're never going to have your competitor be connected to the comm system. But in all sports, in F1, communication is standard, and there's a safety coordinator that messages everybody saying there's a wreck in section 1. Boom. And then truthfully, it's up to the teams and the riders to know what section they're talking about, because that's part of the safety. That should be in the safety meeting, the riders meeting at every race before the start, is make sure you know. It's just like knowing the direction of the track that you're going, because so many times we see riders get on the track going the wrong way and there's a head-on collision. It's so easily preventable. But us as the community have to teach everybody what's right and wrong. And so the comms in F1, these guys are doing 200 plus miles an hour the majority of the time. And a quick button, they're focused in, zoned in, and if somebody comes on the radio, they're able to communicate, okay? The riders probably don't need to have a button to talk back at times, but to start, just a safety coordinator. And then eventually transition it into, you've got one guy on the team that's able to communicate with the rider when they say, hey, the motor's overheating, you need to hold on. Like, the pit board is just old technology. We should not have that at the professional level. And at the local amateur level, it's hard to have everybody have comms. However, there was a time when transponders weren't a thing, and now you rent a transponder. I don't find it entirely out of this world to potentially see a world where even during the amateur races, at least at some of the bigger ones, that you have that safety involved. But while we are getting there and transitioning the investment to get there, what Chad Reed was saying as far as some better age group classes, but the comms is probably the easiest and safest solution to most of these problems that we are observing in our sport. And with a heavy heart, my condolences yet again go out to the Zingg family. And I'd like to leave the outro to this video as a silence for his remembrance. But as I do that, make sure you guys have your voice be heard in the comments below, because it's a conversation that needs to continually start and not only excelled when there's a tragedy, but before there's a tragedy, it needs to continue to be talked about. And so please stay with me for the few moments of silence to remember Aidan.